The summer I turned 13, my parents announced they were selling the farm and moving to Florida. No more cows, no more tractors, just endless sunshine and white sand beaches. At least that's what my dad said. But when I looked at Mom, I saw worry etched on her face. Worry and relief. I could tell even then that whatever magic our farm held, it wouldn't follow us to the coast. As it turned out, the magic stayed with Maggie Hart. My best friend and I explored the woods behind our farms, built tree houses, made promises as big as the sky, and somewhere between fireflies and skinned knees, I fell in love with her. She was my confidant, my partner in crime, my anchor. She was also my first heartbreak. By the time we were 17, both our families had moved on, leaving behind the whispers of our friendship. A friendship that died with unspoken words and stolen glances. And now here I was, 10 years older and back at the house I grew up in, except it didn't smell like fresh baked bread or Sunday pot roast. It smelled like cedar and rain-soaked earth. I walked deeper inside, my senses on high alert. When I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. A woman stood by the window, her shoulders familiar yet foreign. I stood there dumbstruck, my suitcase forgotten at the door. "Clara," she said, turning slowly. "Older, yes, but undeniably her." Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, her steady gaze boring into mine. A lifetime seemed to flash before my eyes. Fireflies, tree houses, whispered promises. Then I cleared my throat. "So you really did this?" she said softly. I gave a nervous laugh. Guess she wanted us to suffer together. It was true. Aunt Margaret had been the matriarch of this town, a force of nature who built this sprawling countryside, a state with her own 2 hands after her husband died. She was fiercely independent, stubborn as hell, and loved with every fiber of her being. After she passed away last month, her lawyer contacted me in California, where I'd rebuilt my life without Maggie. He told me about the will, about the one condition to inherit the estate. I'd have to come live here for 3 months, and if I decided to stay, the house and land would be mine. If not, the estate would be sold and the money split between charities. It wasn't an offer I could refuse. This house had been the backdrop of my happiest memories. But I hadn't bargained on seeing Maggie again, hadn't rehearsed what I would say, what I would do. "You haven't changed one bit," I said, finally breaking the silence. She arched an eyebrow. "You don't say." I stepped closer, surprised by the unexpected ache in my chest. She smelled like fresh earth and honeysuckle. Suddenly self-conscious, I put some distance between us. Where can I put my stuff?" "There's a guest room upstairs," she said quietly. I watched her walk away and realized I hadn't unpacked. In all the weeks I'd been here, I'd been avoiding this moment, the one where we acknowledge what we both knew was true. We had feelings for each other, feelings that had been buried for a decade. The first few weeks were pure torture. I felt like a teenager again, awkward and unsure, afraid to speak first, afraid to make things worse. I spent most of my days exploring the nooks and crannies of this house, breathing in the scent of cedar and rain-soaked earth, walking through overgrown gardens and reminiscing about a time when life was simpler. There were boxers stacked in the corners, filled with memories that once brought me joy, like a worn copy of Anne of Green Gables and a box of hand-stitched quilts. But as the days grew shorter and the air crisper, I started to feel a change. I found Evelyn in the kitchen, hanging dried herbs from the ceiling, and the space between us suddenly felt less like a burden and more like a possibility. On particularly chilly evenings, we huddled near the fireplace, sipping hot chocolate and talking about our dreams, fears, and everything in between. Slowly but surely, the ice that had formed around my heart started to melt. We cooked together, we painted walls, we restored furniture. With every brushstroke, every bite of food we shared, the connection between us grew stronger, and though neither of us mentioned what had happened between us all those years ago, it hung in the air between us. An elephant made of unspoken words and stolen glances. One rainy evening, the power went out, and I found Evelyn in the kitchen, lighting candles. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the room feel both cozy and intimate. "Do you remember?" she asked softly, her eyes sparkling in the dim light, "when we used to sneak into this kitchen for cookies?" I smiled, my chest tightening. "And you'd always get caught because you couldn't stop laughing." She laughed then, a sound I thought I'd forgotten. And for a moment, it was just like old times, just like before the world had grown up and complicated. As the weeks passed, I found myself falling for her all over again. I loved the way she smelled like fresh earth and honeysuckle. I loved the sound of her laughter. Most of all, I loved the way she looked at me like I was the only person in the room. It was magical, exhilarating, terrifying. Was it possible to go back to what we almost had, to the love we almost shared, or were we better off letting the past stay in the past? Then, one evening, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I was sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, watching Evelyn sketch in a notebook. "Why did you stop writing?" I whispered, my voice catching. She looked up, her eyes questioning. "Why did you stop writing to me?" I repeated, my gaze dropping to my lap. I traced patterns on the rug, willing her to understand that this wasn't just a question, it was a plea. Finally, she set down her pencil, and I felt her presence beside me before I even heard her voice. "Because I loved you," she said quietly, and I was scared. The room went still. I took a shaky breath. "You think I wasn't scared too?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. It was tentative at first, but neither of us pulled away. And in that silence, 10 years of longing, of unspoken words and stolen glances came flooding back. I intertwined my fingers with hers, surprised by the strength of my emotions, and then I leaned in, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Evelyn met me halfway, and in that kiss, all the pieces of my soul that had been scattered fell into place. It was a kiss that tasted like honeysuckle and whispered promises, a kiss that carried the weight of a decade of longing. In the weeks that followed, we didn't shy away from the silence anymore. We talked about our past, about the what-ifs and could-have-beens. We talked about our future, about dreams and fears and everything in between. We talked until our voices were hoarse and our hearts were full. I learned that Evelyn had stayed in town after her family moved. Her mother had fallen ill and she never left her side. I told her about my life in San Francisco, about the gallery where I sold my paintings, about the men I'd loved and lost. With each conversation, with each shared meal, with each stolen kiss, the house began to feel less like a burden and more like a blessing. One crisp morning, Evelyn led me to the garden where my aunt had once planted roses. Now wild and tangled, they climbed the stone wall, spilling over the top like liquid gold. "She knew," Evelyn said suddenly. "Your aunt. She knew about us." I blinked, startled. "You think that's why she did this?" Evelyn nodded. "She wanted us to find our way back." I wrapped my arms around Evelyn, burying my face in her neck. The familiar scent of honeysuckle calmed the turmoil in my chest. "Then let's not waste it," I whispered, and under the wild roses, I kissed her. By the end of 3 months, the lawyer returned to finalize the inheritance. He found me in the garden with Evelyn, our bodies tangled together like vines. When we told him about our plans to stay in this house, about our dreams of making it our own, he smiled. "It looks like your aunt's wish has come true," he said, his voice echoing the sentiment I felt. By the end of 3 months, the will had done its job. It changed everything. We were going to stay in this house, in the place where our friendship bloomed, where our love story began. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was a place filled with memories, with laughter, with love. It was home.